I'm really excited to tell you about our newest innovation. We're calling it Jaygo, or Join As You Go. I've been perfecting this idea for the last couple of months, and I think that you're going to be just as excited about this new idea for joining quilt blocks in the hoop as I am. You'll be amazed when you see how quickly your rows go together, and all that's left for you to do outside of your embroidery hoop is join your rows, add your borders, and your binding. I have in front of me two blocks, one in the hoop, one out of the hoop. The one that is already out of the hoop has been trimmed. Two sides are trimmed to 1/4 of an inch past the seam guide. We double trimmed the other two sides so that they are 1/2 of an inch past the seam line for the backing and 1/4 of an inch past the seam line for the front fabrics. We're going to create a 1/4 of an inch fabric lip on the back side of this block that we will be using in joining. This 1/4 of an inch lip will follow the same procedures that we use when joining quilt blocks without sashing. We're going to turn the block over. We're going to slide our 3/8 of an inch jig up to the block, and the jig is going to stop when it touches the fabric at the 3/8 of an inch line. I'm going to use my easy fold pin to draw a line right along the edge of the ruler. Remove the ruler, and my fabric will fold right on the line I drew. And then I'll give the backing a quick press. Once that's done, I will take a piece of transparent tape and I will secure my backing out of the needle's path. Next, I'll take my block that's still in the hoop and I'll turn the hoop over so that I can see the backing. I will take the top of the backing and I will roll it down and secure it with transparent tape as well. Now I'm ready to return my hoop to the machine. I've reattached my hoop to the machine and advanced to the color break that's used for joining my two blocks together. My needle position is at stitch number 1 of the color break. And when I add the block that I'm joining, you can see the placement guide that I stitched in earlier that's going to show me exactly where I want all the stitches in the joining seam to fall. I'm going to drop my needle and make sure that my needle hits exactly in the first stitch of this guide. I'm going to take one stitch that will allow me to bring my bobbin thread to the front to prevent any bird nests. And then I'm going to stitch 3 or 4 stitches to thread tack the beginning of my seam in place. I'll clip my thread and advance my needle position to the end of the stitching line. Again, I'll drop a needle, and when I'm happy with my placement, I will back my needle position up just a few stitches and again thread tack the position. The block that I'm using has a diamond point in the center, and I want to make sure that when I join my blocks I don't clip the point off. So I'm going to treat this center point as a critical match point. So I'm going to advance to the center of the stitching line, which should be the point of the diamond, and I'm going to take a few stitches. And my goal at this point is to stay right on the stitched guides that I showed earlier. So when I check my alignment, I can see that my full point is showing and that my alignment is going to be just fine. So I'm going to return the hoop to the machine. I'm going to return to the first stitch in the color break, and I'm going to begin to sew. And as I sew, I'm going to keep my stitching right along the previously stitched guide. And now the fronts of my blocks are joined. I'm going to take my hoop out of the machine and meet you back at the cutting board. I've taken my blocks out of my machine and we're ready to begin our trimming. When we're joining two blocks, one of the blocks will be trimmed to 1/4 of an inch past the seam allowance on all 3 layers of the block. The second block will be double trimmed. The back side of the block will always be trimmed 1/4 of an inch wider than the front. When we began the process of joining these two blocks, this backing side was trimmed to 1/2 inch. That means that the other side needs to be trimmed to 1/4. We'll open out the backing and we'll lay our ruler with the 1/4 of an inch line on the stitched seam and trim. Next, we'll open out the blocks where we can easily see that this side will continue at 1/4 of an inch trim. On this side, the backing needs to be 1/4 of an inch wider. We'll align the 1/4 of an inch guide of our ruler with the stitched line and trim. And on this side, we'll align our 1/2 inch markings on the acrylic ruler with the stitching line and trim. Our last trim for the joined pair of blocks will be across the top edge. And when we trim for this edge will include the fabric lip on the back side that's going to be joined to the next hooped block. For this particular diamond, we want to trim exactly 1/2 inch from the point of this diamond. If we were doing a different block that didn't have the point, we could always get our 1/2 inch stitching line by turning the block over and looking at the back side of the stabilizer. So going back to our diamond, we will align our 1/2 inch marking right at the point of the diamond. I'll also align one of the solid lines with the edge of the block to make sure that I'm straight on 2 sides. And I'll trim. So now that our block is joined, we have 2 steps left before we're ready to start our next block. Next, I'll prepare to close the back, and I'll start by pressing the 1/4 of an inch side and the seam allowance towards the 1/2 inch side or the side with our fabric lip. And I'll take a piece of heat press batting together that I've cut the size of the seam that I'm closing. I will press the heat press batting together with an iron that's hot enough to melt the adhesive but not so hot that it burns the tape. Then I will fold the 1/4 of an inch side back over the heat press batting together. Next, I'll flip back the fabric lip, give it a short press, and then use my school glue to hold the fabric lip in place so that I can take it to my sewing machine. I've stitched in the ditch from the top side of my blocks, and as you can see, I've got a very tidy line of top stitching that shows on the back, and this is where my 2 blocks have been permanently joined together on the back side. When I'm stitching in the ditch, I always use Wonderfill Invisifil thread. It's 100 weight cottonized polyester. It's very strong and it's so thin that you can use a tiny needle and the stitches just slip right in between the 2 blocks and become invisible. These blocks are permanently joined together on the fronts and the backs. And in our process, we will start referring to the completed blocks as the string. We're going to build another block in the hoop, and when we come to the end of that block, we will join this string to the new block and make a longer string. And we will continue this process until the row is complete. The last step is to create a fabric lip on the back side of the string so that it's ready to join to the next block.